thanks to real reality and social networks. But you have so many different personalities, and welcome to this roundtable in the Motor Valley Fest. Thanks for being with us here physically and remotely, and thanks to our guests. And we will now start with Rodi Basso, co-founder CEO of One Series, Giacomo Donisi, founder CEO of Danisi Engineering SRL, Alessio Cicolari, CEO of AK Informatica, Giovanni De Salvo, pilot of E-Race Ferrari Academy. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And then George F. Stratudakis, Behavior Business Solution. George, sorry if I mispronounce your name. Here we are. Let's start talk about simulation gaming, virtual reality, augmented reality, with the $1 billion a year business, and only in Italy, 460,000 people attend a sports event at least once a week. So you always imagine and think that it is a simple, superficial world, but no. Indeed, there is a whole universe behind it. Let's start with Alessio Cicolari, CEO of AK Informatica. Let's open this Pandora's box, because the initial picture that we get comes from the various VIPs, Lerck, and various football players, Valentino Rossi, and others attending these competitions. What's behind this facade in terms of software, but also in terms of hardware? And let's therefore broaden the horizon in terms of academy, engineers, pilots. Yeah, it is true. You open not just the Pandora's box, but maybe last year or thanks to or because of the COVID situation, we had people who are involved in real sports, in gaming, like Formula One pilots or football players, etc., who have devoted and got fond of this virtual world. So they knew how to do it. They were really pumped up. Being a sportsman, you want to compete, you want to win. It is part of their DNA, even worse than when they do what they generally do, being at home all the time of the world. Well, they wanted to have fun with gaming and virtual reality. What's behind it? It's a completely new world, driving energies, sources from real life, sports field, etc. But this kind of energy is turned into video gaming, digital world. As you could see, many real events have become virtual in all sorts of ways. Even the TV news on TV, everything had become virtual, and therefore we transformed physical events. But this year we are doing it on site. Last year we did this edition online with many real pilots competing virtually. And in spite of technical difficulties, we decided to develop new assets and technologies and realize that even in terms of views, of course, when it comes to entertainment and show, the fundamental thing is the audience. So there were many viewers. That is why we started cooperating with Meda Vanzini from Sky Sport to produce various events. The one with Rossi, Leclerc, Tony Parker. I can't even remember all the names. I remember that it should have been thing with the 3 people, but in 3 days everything was done remotely and broadcast on Sky TV. And that allowed us to train a new generation occupational profiles. We find it difficult to find true experts that might be hired in this sector because, of course, they have to know about world of work, but also gaming, and that is anything to do with sports, or not so much so. So you tried and did a merge between a real and a virtual reality, like the Grand Prix. The pilots would do a real competition on the racetrack, and on the other side, they were doing it virtually on a virtual platform. There was a convergence between virtual and real. There is a true convergence, right? This has always been my dream since ever, when I started investing in sim racing and its showbiz part of it. I work with Kuno for the development of this kind of activity, and SRO who is the organizer of this championship. So we started to involve sportsmen in this circuit. So in paddocks in 2019, and also thanks to the contribution of a great sponsor coming from the video game world that sponsored this activity, we managed to create this 500 square meter tent with many simulators, 1 pilot per team participating in the endurance series, who is supposed to participate in the all sports event, and awards are given that are quite big, even 6,000 euro for every lap. So it becomes interesting, right? And the beauty of it is that the efforts made by teams and manufacturers have increased. They are fond, just like Ferrari does. The brand itself understood clearly that this is another way of enjoying competitions. GP World Challenge is a further step to do that, to let the two types of sports meet. That's how I see it. One thing is the racing, and these are two different sports. Apart from prototyping and apart from electrification, we've talked about pilots, and of course we've got this young talent here with us, Giovanni De Salvo, sim racer. So what is it? We saw a picture of Casilli, who would train with the tennis balls just a few minutes before the competition itself. So I was thinking of a joystick, a real pilot that also physically gets trained, but you'd never think that a virtual pilot never train. It is not so. So of course, real pilots require a certain strength to do races that last more than an hour. It's a different strength required from a virtual pilot. But having a good physical shape is a fundamental thing, especially if you want to play at a professional level. You have to be ready even when you are just 1,000 behind somebody else. So being in a full shape is fundamental. We are not just focusing on physical strength, but on reflexes, and so we are trained specifically for that. And then we of course train every day throughout the week, so we are we get more into depth as against the real pilots. What about driving as such? I was talking with Keko Bagnaia and Nielsen with Ferrari, and they were telling me how constant driving, a constant focus to detail, simulators, braking, and the feelings. I think there is not so much difference between real world and virtual world. What do you think? I mean, it is a kind of world that has many more similarities than differences. I remember last year here in Formula One, there were racing tracks that had never been involved in racing virtually, at least maybe once, and they had asked for the simulator to learn about the racing track so that during Saturday, when the free trial would occur, they would therefore know exactly how the track would look like and focus on other aspects. So from that point of view, the simulator is absolutely useful. Now, engineer Danisi, reproducing the feelings, actually, I go into the details before broadening the discourse. Reproducing these feelings in reality, of course, you need support. You need to have studies to communicate at best and reproduce load, the feedback that has to be transferred, the strength, the feedback on the steering wheel, but also not just that. I mean, what are the areas where you can act on? What are the opportunities that the virtual world can offer, can deliver to the real world of racing for consumers, for sim drivers from home, and also for companies? Well, let's say that the use of simulation technology. Of course, we are now talking of cars, but this kind of methodology, the simulation techniques, technology is becoming ever more widespread because it is fundamental. In the past, it was said that it reduces, shortens times, and costs. But now the true problem is that a few products like cars have become so complex that facing that complexity in the real world alone is no longer possible. And so you have to go to the real world through pre-training, and simulation techniques are fundamental to have a better and clearer idea of what to expect. Feedback is very important, as you were saying, because at the end, all in all, this further development of sophisticated controls cannot happen with not thinking about the true pilot, the true driver. It would be impossible. We tried to come up with a reliable pilot model. We tried it, but the only way to do it, to do activities providing robust results, is having the driver himself in the simulation loop, the driver in the loop, so that at the end you have a simulation. There are fundamental differences, but the interpretation is the same. Differences have to do with the final and ultimate goal of the activity. For us, in the industrial field, it is important to keep the latency, the time delta, the lag between what should happen in reality and what happens during a simulation. There should be lower than 15 milliseconds. Why? Because if it is higher than that, 15 milliseconds, drivers do not say latency is too much, but is perceptions of the phenomenon that is experiencing change. So the feedback is no longer reliable. Whereas in gaming, things are different. Of course, I'm not looking for a correlation with what happens in reality and what I'm doing actually, but I am focused on an experience for its own sake. It is true that pilots do that to learn about the racing track, but there are other types of pilots that do that for sports purposes. In the other case, graphics is important to have. In the gaming, it wouldn't be acceptable to reduce the graphics quality. In the game, in 10 years ago, would have been science fiction. If you think of today's graphics, I mean, it's nothing. But the fundamentals, the vehicle model, the tire model is the same. We remember when at the beginning of the racing, they would come and ask, I've done this model, what should I do in order to? So this is the same. And also when it comes to feedback, this is the same, but of course the ultimate goals are different. But that's what's happening. There is a convergence between these two worlds, the virtual simulation world and real world. The brake-by-wire, steer-by-wire, the by-wire technologies now that are now being developed. We are transferring the gaming station into a car, into a vehicle, because I'm using a steer wheel that is very similar to the true feedback steering wheel that I use with gaming. And there are also steering wheels that are interchangeable between one and the other. And by the way, let's now talk about a slightly different world from land, from the road to the water. So prototyping, developing, simulation. Mr. Basso, the electric nature of boats in your championship, how could that converge with a virtual development? Possibly two scenarios, either a simulation concept or a simulation that is geared for the development itself. The nature changes, and Adranigui was talking about boats as a further aerodynamic development that is very important. But anyway, that could be a further way of developing through simulation. What you said is very important. That is absolutely right, to the point. Let's say that my answer refers to the various roles that I play as a CEO, as promoter of A1. That is the only world championship of electric motorboats, according to the license granted by a federation. And I'm also the technical engineer of the startup developing these electric boats. Every time we talk about simulation models and as well as gaming, I always see at least three aspects that might benefit from the gaming field. First of all, as you just said, simulation, technical simulation at all levels when it comes to drawing, design, structure, to have the right stability, dynamics, and electronics that is ever more present in any vehicle, be it a car or a boat or a craft. And this is no longer a trend. This is a reality that you cannot do without. Another element is in entertainment. Everything that is necessary to promote a series, just like any other sports, even motor racing, even by means of motorboats, has been suffering over the past 5 years, because it is important to better understand the interaction and involvement of fans, supporters within a show that is characterized by a high complexity and man-machine interaction that is ever more difficult to tell in terms of storytelling, as journalists are supposed to do. Having a simulation model, gaming, and everything that has to do with the digital may be helpful, but they have to be interpreted. So this is a powerful tool. And last but not least, that's what really excites me as for A1. E1, sorry, is video game projects. And this is fundamental of the business strategy today of anything you might think of. And that in terms of generating in business fora and various magazines. I've read that through video game you can buy food for refugees, and while you play, you buy the food in terms of the game dynamics, but the final result is supplying food to people who are starving, who need to be fed, and that is gaming with a social purpose. And that is a successful example of gaming, but you need to read these interpretations well. And another aspect is educational aspect, edutainment. I'm thinking of motor racing and grassroots. How can I train pilots of the future without having any grassroots? We don't have go-kart, Formula 4, etc., to train pilots, maybe because of sustainability, but also in terms of viability, feasibility with the Nissan Academy, for example. I mean, this is another aspect, education. This instrument, this tool might be helpful. Let me also add that, of course, not everything is made of opportunities, but there are many challenges as well. When Alessia was talking about the merge between real and virtual, we need to understand what the border between the two is. And having a few years with this gray beard that I have, we always do that not to remain in a digital, virtual world that is not real, but the ultimate goal should be improving people's lives, improving workers' lives, improving the sports experience. The ultimate goal is human beings in general. I remember my experience in Formula One in one of the teams I worked with, when a young person was at office and was arguing with a mechanic about the rear wing of the car, and he said, no, it is X. And the other one was saying, why? That's what the simulation says, and so they should be part of the education. These tools are powerful but sensitive.
Magari se vogliamo un po' più aspetto sociale.
We will go back to the social aspect, but before I go to Georges Faldakis, I would like to say a couple of words and hear from you about the occasions that we can have from the virtual sphere. Still remaining in the sim world, a pilot who had a serious accident and had problems at his legs was now racing again virtually during the last pandemic. So having new opportunities, applying those to ideas like, overcoming a disability. You have the floor, and then, of course, all of you. It's a matter of social inclusion. Can you repeat the question, please? Yes, I see that the world of simulation can also mean social inclusion, because it goes well beyond the physical boundaries. Yes, this has to do with the topic I mentioned earlier on. So inclusion is one of the most outstanding topics on top of this broader impact it has. And for sure, it's not just linked with that experience that you can extend to anybody else, but the very fact that you can make people experience something also in real life means having a project instrument that you can utilize to go back to the real world. Otherwise, it could be an application ghettoization. I think that these technologies that are based on a simulation heart, on a simulation core, enable us to apply solutions that you couldn't have conceived in the past when you based your results on mechanical trials. Now, this means that we can also include people with different abilities, differently abled people. In the world of simulation, we can leverage these technologies in terms of utilizing them as driving interface that simulate real driving, enabling these people to make experiences that were unthinkable of in the past. So we're working with the car transformers, and thanks to these new technologies, we can now do things that were unthinkable in the past. And of course, in the past, to drive a racing car, you had to have a lot of money and a lot of racing car fans couldn't even try it. Now, having the possibility of simulate things gives you a possibility of at least getting a flavor for it. Of course, it's a different thing to drive the real car, but yeah, I do agree as well with this last statement, because I would expand the e-sport not just to simulation but also to other things. I believe it's very democratic concept, also in terms of differences between men and women in the e-racing. Things become equal, democratic. You can carry out a competition with or participate to a race with disabled people, or they can do it with you. And some guys made it possible to utilize some steering wheels for people who had no legs, for example. And going back to what we were saying earlier, yes, the real life is the ultimate goal, but Giovanni, for example, doesn't just work for the purpose of developing cars, but rather creating communities. He's concentrating on creating a community. This is a difference between now and the past. We take people together, we bring them together, we let them play in a community. We do it in a virtual world. We have done some activities at the primary schools where we now utilize virtual experiences in community settings or in groups. So virtual linked with reality. Yeah, for sure, it's a reality that has no frontiers. Going back to what they were saying, I know quite a few people who have physical disabilities. The lower limbs for them wouldn't make it possible to drive a car, but they can do it now thanks to the very many instruments we have nowadays to resolve this. Concerning economic disability, instead, I would like to ask virtual pilots what would be their dreams and why do they want to become real pilot. And for, of course, economic reasons, you have to go to virtual possibilities. Now, Mr. Vasadakis, we've been talking about racings and motorsports, but concerning the software in general, in more general terms, what can you tell us about the possibilities of further development? What are the difficulties as of today to make the virtual and the real world come together?
First of all, thank you for having me on this interesting panel. This is extremely engaging. Second of all, I think this is a great question, and funny enough, the answer may surprise you. When looking at what we in the gaming industry are doing for the enterprise space, and by enterprise space, I say everything outside of traditional gaming, whether it's simulators, developing configuration tools, using virtual reality and augmented reality training tools, excuse me. In essence, everything that leverages and exploits the raw power of real-time 3D, you realize, or we realize.
Abbiamo avuto un piccolo problema di collegamento evidentemente e allora
So we have a connection problem in this moment. So let's go back to our virtual pilot. We talked about feelings, sensations, but also professionalism. A certain level of professionalism is something that, from the standpoint of the pilot, I mean, what can you tell us about your feelings when you are, at the racing track? Adrenaline, anxiety, concentration. What does it mean to be a virtual pilot? Many real pilots said that at the start they felt more under pressure during a virtual race rather than a real one. But apart from this, I believe that you have to manage so many things, and the start is the moment where you can gain or lose positions. So especially when you're running sprint races where you have to push on the gas pedal and drive very powerfully, that is really comparable to a real race under many respects. I see the connection with Kamagai. Then George, maybe you want to continue? If you want, please go ahead.
Yes, I don't know where I cut off or where I left off, but I'll just, I guess, start from the top. Regarding your question, I think it's a very interesting question, and the answer may surprise you. When you look at what we're doing for the enterprise space, in other words, anything outside of gaming, whether it's developing simulators or configuration tools or virtual reality and augmented reality training tools, in essence, everything that leverages and exploits the raw power of real-time 3D, you realize, or we quickly realized, that the greatest difficulty was also the greatest opportunity. And that was convincing the people in the non-gaming verticals to leverage gaming DNA, and more specifically game engines, to achieve what it is that they're trying to do. These tools, and specifically game engines, have the ability to democratize native 3D assets from legacy systems, allowing for everyone from engineers and designers all the way to client-facing roles the ability to access, to view, to manipulate, to customize, to configure 3D visuals without requiring extensive training or years of academic backgrounds, right? So in essence, once you get over that technology hump, that's very specific to the gaming industry, the possibilities are truly endless.
Ok, lato software.
Software side, what can we expect in the future, also in terms of possible option for the gaming industry or for programming industry? What can we expect in terms of possibilities in gaming, entertainment, but also in the business-to-business area?
So we certainly can expect a lot, and in fact, we should expect a lot and constantly have our expectations surpassed when it comes to the future of gaming development and gaming software, and specifically augmented reality, right? The limitations or the boundaries of one technology vis-a-vis the other are not only fading, but are now blending with one another. The most interesting example I've witnessed very recently And you know, both Alessio and Roddy made, and Giacomo as well, made references to that whole convergence between virtual and reality. So this example was a good indication of where we're heading. So this was a simulation. It was a simulation where an operator is using augmented reality headsets while operating the actual machinery. So, you know, you can imagine a pilot flying, a driver driving, a captain navigating, or an operator operating heavy machinery, but they're doing this with augmented reality glasses. What the AR brings into this is that the mission or the training scenario that it's going on is 100% virtually. So, you know, if we, you know, take the example of esports, imagine somebody driving around Imola, for instance, or Silverstone, or wherever for that matter, completely alone on the circuit, but with augmented reality glasses that shows other pilots in that same context. So just imagine that value of, you know, the value of that level of immersion, whether it's from a gaming perspective, whether it's from a training perspective. You know, the interesting thing is that gaming technology has allowed us to be at the precipice of this reality. And when I look down the road of the future, the only limitation that we have is really our imagination.
Okay, thank you so much. Cicoladi.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your answer. Is it complicated to organize a virtual event, or is it easy to make the virtual and real event converge? We think very often of so different things. Well, I can tell you that the virtual thing is more difficult in a way, because, you know, when you have people connected from 20 different parts of the world with different tools, with different devices, it's not easy to understand where the problem is. Both things have their complications. So when we do some on-site sports, we do it virtually and really at the same time, and people are all in the same location. So last year we didn't have the opportunity to do that, but we will start again this year. So complexity. Complexity means having many technologies that mix together, and they're all innovative. Say, for example, TV camera connectivity, acquiring images from video gaming devices. They use very special settings, and we know that for real simulation we have to have a very low latency time. And the same happens in the professional e-sport, which gives you problems in terms of production. So acquiring an image from a screen is not so easy as you would think. You need a certain frequency, and I'm not going to go into the details, but you can imagine what this entails. And then if you have problems in competing, you know that people are not happy if their gas pedal is not as set appropriately as it should be. So it's a world that mirrors the real world, but you have the virtual component that has to be managed in the same way Diverting Media does it with 40 cameras on a circuit. We have to do it with 2 computers only. From the basso to Giacomo Danesi, what could be the perspectives that we can expect to happen in the future? So you were a race engineer, so you have a past experience. How do you think the professional profile could evolve for prototyping purposes, or, well, let's put it this way. If we accept specific vertical lines where you develop hardware and software according to the new technologies, would speed up the ability to process information and make them visually, visible, I believe that there will be a new HMI configuration, machine and men going towards extremes. So what we heard from George, I think we're going in that direction. Just think of a surgeon, for example. A surgeon has the possibility of having an augmented reality and therefore information that make it possible for him to work more efficiently and safely and meet the objective. This is absolutely fascinating, and in the next 10 years we will see incredible developments going further. So some people call it the industry of distraction. We have to see if we have control over the information we receive and to which extent we can decide to do what is necessary for us, both in our profession as well as in real life. Well, I think it's very interesting. What we're seeing here is that it is necessary to have a different approach to all the methodologies, the engineering methodologies that are available, because the possibilities we now have are very interesting compared to the old methodologies. Simulation was supporting the development process, one used to say. Now, instead, simulation is the development process. The physical activity is supporting the development process. So we talk about digital twin, or the analog twin is my objective. I start from the virtual reality and I can develop very rapidly the product. Of course, we belong to the old generation and we're wearing a tie, in fact. We've gotten used to working with physical parts, but now and again you have to build a physical object, because one of the risks in simulations is that you never deal with the real thing, you know. In interpreting results in a simulated environment, you tend to see things the way you would like them to be. So it is sometimes useful to have a physical object that gives you the possibility to see reality as it is. When working with new projects on a white paper, we give the possibility to a driver to drive a new vehicle architecture after a few weeks' time from day zero. In the past, you would need 1.5 years. Now, being capable of driving a prototype after 1.5 years would give you misleading information in the past, whereas a good simulation model could give you better results in a few weeks' time. But in any case, you have to be capable of seeing the process with different eyes. This is why you need technicians, engineers, designers who are capable of exploiting these new realities, these new things. It's the new way to do things. Having worked for McLaren in the past, I can tell you that right from the start, when we began using simulators and utilizing digital twins, a supercar development was reduced from 5 years to 2, which has an impact on costs and on efficiency, also in emissions, and so on and so forth. this means that we now have a new mentality, a new mindset.
Insomma,
So we have so far listened to the various simulation applications in the virtual world, and let's talk about the virtual hall that was simulated in the hospital of Bologna to allow better tests for doctors so that they can be better trained as surgeons, so it can also save lives. So thanks a lot to the various guests. Also to George with us from Canada. And thanks for being with us, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I see you in the next talk show during this Motor Valley Fest. Thank you. Have a nice lunch.